The gun was pressed against my head. Everyone around me was screaming, but I didn't move. I just breathed. Calm, steady, almost unreal. I wasn't brave, I was terrified, but I knew panic would kill us faster. What I didn't know was that my calm would change everything. My name is Cheryl, and for most of my life I believed I was just another face in the crowd. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. My days were simple, predictable even, yet quietly heavy in a way only I truly understood. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same peeling paint on the ceiling of my tiny apartment, the same humming radiator that only half worked in the winter, and the same pile of bills waiting on the kitchen counter like uninvited guests. I worked at a little cafe tucked away on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place people passed by without really noticing, unless they needed a quick cup of coffee on their way to somewhere more important. My shifts were long, often stretching into the late hours of the night, and my feet were always sore. By the end of the day, I'd be covered in the smell of coffee beans, fried food, and exhaustion. Customers came and went, their lives spilling out in fragments I overheard, arguments over money, whispered confessions, hurried phone calls, or nervous laughter on first dates. And me? I stayed behind the counter, smiling when I had to, listening when I wasn't supposed to, and quietly surviving. There wasn't much glamour in my world. I didn't own expensive clothes or fancy jewelry. My wardrobe was built from practicality: shirts that wouldn't show stains too easily, comfortable shoes that could withstand 12 hours of standing, and a coat that had seen better winters but still kept out the cold. I wasn't someone people looked at twice when they passed me on the street, and honestly, I didn't expect them to. Still, there was something I carried with me, though I didn't recognize it as a gift back then. I had a kind of stillness inside me. When others panicked, I had this strange way of staying calm, as if my body refused to give in to chaos. Some people mistook it for being detached, but the truth was, I'd learned that panic never solved anything. Growing up, I'd watched my mother fall apart whenever life threw challenges at her. Bills would pile up, repairs would be needed, and she'd cry, scream, and make everyone around her feel even more unstable. I decided early on I wouldn't be like that. If the world was going to spin out of control, I'd be the one holding steady, even if inside I was breaking. But steadiness doesn't pay rent, calmness doesn't buy groceries, so even with this quiet strength, my life stayed small. I lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck, telling myself that maybe someday things would change, but never really believing they would. I thought my story was destined to remain ordinary, that I'd live and die behind that cafe counter, unseen and unremarkable. I didn't know then that everything I considered ordinary, the stillness, the resilience, the quiet patience, was preparing me for something extraordinary, and the moment that would change everything was closer than I could ever imagine. The night that changed everything started out like any other. I was halfway through a long shift, wiping down tables and refilling sugar jars, when the doorbell chimed. Normally, that sound meant another customer, another order, another routine moment, but this time, the air shifted. 3 men walked in, their faces half hidden beneath cheap masks, and before I could even register what was happening, one of them pulled out a gun. The cafe froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Cups slipped from trembling hands and shattered on the floor. A woman screamed and someone knocked over a chair in their rush to duck for cover. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Fear clawed at my throat, begging me to scream, to panic, to run, but I didn't. Somehow, I stayed still. "Everybody down!" one of the men barked, his voice sharp and raw. I could hear the metallic click of a gun being cocked. People scrambled to obey, their bodies pressed against the cold tile floor, sobbing and praying under their breath. Behind the counter, I stood frozen, not out of shock but out of choice. My hands were steady even though my insides were shaking. In the corner of my eye, I spotted a little boy clinging to his mother's sleeve, his tiny frame shaking like a leaf in the wind. His mother was trying to shield him, but she was trembling so badly she could hardly breathe. Something inside me moved then, something instinctual. I crouched beside them, whispering softly, "It's okay, keep your head down. Just breathe with me." My voice was calm, low, almost like a lullaby. The boys' sobs slowed, and for a moment I forgot there were guns pointed at us. One of the robbers came closer, demanding cash from the register. His footsteps echoed like thunder, but I kept my eyes on the mother and child. My stillness seemed to irritate him. He shouted at me to hurry, waving his weapon like a threat made of metal and rage. My hands obeyed, opening the till, sliding the bills into a plastic bag, but my voice didn't crack. "You don't need to hurt anyone," I told him gently. "Take it and go. That's all anyone wants." I don't know why I said it. Maybe I was talking to him, maybe I was talking to myself, but in that moment, I wasn't shaking like everyone else. I wasn't crying. I was simply there, grounded, as if my calmness could anchor the whole room. Minutes felt like hours, but finally the men rushed out the door, sirens already wailing in the distance. Silence swallowed the cafe. People sobbed in relief, clinging to each other. I just stood there, my hands still, my breath even. What I didn't realize then was that I hadn't been alone in my calmness. Someone else had been watching me from the corner booth, a man I thought was just another customer. But he wasn't, and what he saw in me that night would change my life forever. The morning after the robbery, I walked into the cafe half expecting life to carry on as if nothing had happened. That's the strange thing about ordinary routines. They have a way of swallowing even the most extraordinary moments, forcing you back into the rhythm of normal. But normal felt strange now. The regulars still came in for their coffee, but their eyes darted nervously to the door each time it opened. My coworkers whispered about what had happened, replaying the details over and over, but I stayed quiet. Inside, I was still trying to understand how I had managed to stay calm when everyone else had broken apart. I was wiping down a table near the window when I noticed him, the man from the corner booth the night before. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but no, it was him. He was dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. He looked ordinary enough to blend in, but there was something about the way he carried himself, like he wasn't used to being ignored. He smiled faintly when our eyes met. "You were here last night," he said softly, as though it were more a statement than a question. "Yes," I answered, wary. "So were you." For a moment he just studied me, and I felt an odd discomfort under his gaze. Not because it was intrusive, but because it was steady, searching. Finally, he said, "I've never seen anyone stay that calm in a situation like that." I let out a short laugh, one without humor. "Calm?" I was terrified. "Maybe inside," he said, "but on the outside, you were the anchor in the room. People looked to you without even realizing it." His words made me pause. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd just done what felt natural, what my gut told me to do. Still, I didn't know what to make of his attention. Customers rarely noticed me beyond their orders, and here was this man speaking as though I had done something extraordinary. He introduced himself simply, no titles, no details, just a name I won't forget. I shook his hand, still uncertain why he was making conversation with me at all. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because people underestimate moments like that," he said. "The world needs more people who can hold steady when everything's falling apart." I brushed it off, embarrassed. "I'm just a waitress," I said quickly, as if the title explained everything. But he shook his head. "Number, you're more than that." And then, just like that, he left, his coffee untouched on the table. I watched him walk out the door, confused, unsettled, yet strangely curious. That night I couldn't stop replaying his words. More than that. What did he see that I couldn't? And why did I feel like this wasn't the last time I'd see him? Days turned into weeks, and I kept seeing him. At first I thought it was coincidence, that he just happened to pass by and stop for coffee. But soon it became clear he was coming back for something else. For me. Not in a romantic way, not with the awkward advances I was used to brushing off from customers. He was curious, almost intentional. He'd ask about my life in small doses. Simple questions. Where I grew up, how long I'd worked at the cafe, if I ever thought about doing something different. I answered cautiously, not sure what he was digging for. I didn't like talking about myself. My life wasn't exactly the kind you bragged about, but he listened, really listened, and every time there was this look in his eyes, like he was putting together a puzzle only he could see. One night after my shift ended, he was waiting outside. The streets were quiet, the neon cafe sign buzzing faintly behind me. I remember feeling both wary and oddly unafraid. He asked if he could walk me home. I hesitated, but something about his calmness mirrored my own. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "I should tell you who I am," he said, his tone serious. I shrugged. "You already told me your name." He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "That's not the whole of it. The truth is, I'm not just another man stopping in for coffee. I own companies, investments, properties all over the world. I'm what people call a billionaire." I stopped walking. For a second, I thought he was joking, maybe testing me. But his face stayed steady, his eyes unwavering. I let out a short laugh. "You're kidding. If that were true, you wouldn't be sitting in a corner booth in my cafe." "That's exactly why I was there," he replied. "I don't go looking for boardrooms or banquets to find real strength. Sometimes the truth is hiding in places no one thinks to look." I didn't know what to say. My mind scrambled with questions. Why me? Why here? Why now? I was just Cheryl, a woman with overdue rent and secondhand shoes. He must have seen the disbelief in my face because he added gently, "That night, when everyone else panicked, you didn't. You showed leadership without saying a word. Calm is rare, and in my world, it's priceless." His words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. He wasn't trying to flatter me, he was making a point. He told me he wanted me to work with him, not as an employee in his companies, but as a partner in something greater, something that could change lives. I remember whispering, almost to myself, "Why me?" And his answer was simple. "Because you're exactly the kind of person the world overlooks, and exactly the kind of person the world needs." Saying yes to him felt like stepping off a cliff into fog. I didn't know what was on the other side, only that my life would never be the same. One week I was pouring coffee for strangers, and the next I was sitting in sleek offices surrounded by people in tailored suits who looked at me like I didn't belong. And maybe they were right. My clothes were plain, my voice trembled in those first meetings, and I felt like a child wandering into a world I wasn't meant to touch. But he believed in me. He sat me at tables where decisions shaped thousands of lives, and then asked what I thought. Like my voice mattered. At first I gave short answers, stumbling over my words. But the more I spoke, the more I realized something. I wasn't talking theory like everyone else. I was talking from experience, from the raw survival of living paycheck to paycheck, from understanding what it feels like to have nothing. And strangely, my words began to land. People leaned in. Some rolled their eyes, but others listened. Still, it wasn't easy. Whispers followed me everywhere. "She's just a waitress?" I overheard one executive mutter under his breath. Another woman, perfectly polished in her pearls and sharp smile, once asked me if I even owned a real suit. The sting of their words clung to me like smoke. I went home some nights ready to quit, to crawl back into my small life where at least no one questioned my right to exist. But then I'd remember that night in the cafe, the child trembling in his mother's arms, the way my calmness had steadied them both. If I could hold a room in the middle of chaos, why couldn't I hold my ground here? So I started leaning into that stillness, not fighting it. When conversations grew heated in boardrooms, I stayed steady. When numbers were tossed around like weapons, I listened, pieced them together, and asked the simple questions no one else dared to. My calmness unnerved people who thrived on intimidation, and slowly I noticed the shift. The very thing I thought made me invisible was making me unforgettable. Of course, doubt didn't disappear overnight. Every time I stumbled, every time I mispronounced some business jargon or asked what seemed like a basic question, I felt those old voices whispering, "You don't belong here." But then he would remind me with a quiet nod or a steady look that belonging wasn't given, it was claimed. The fire of those trials burned me, reshaped me, and forced me to see myself differently. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was Cheryl, a woman learning, faltering, and rising, one meeting, one challenge, one steady breath at a time. I didn't know it yet, but another test was coming, one far bigger than any boardroom or business deal. And when it arrived, the world would finally see what I had only just begun to believe about myself. The night of the charity gala was supposed to be a celebration. Lights draped across the grand hall, glittering chandeliers swayed above, and laughter floated like music through the air. I had been nervous about attending, but he insisted I be there, front and center. "You belong in this room," he told me. And though I didn't fully believe it, I went anyway. At first, it felt like every other gathering I had stumbled into since entering his world. Polished men in tuxedos, women in gowns that shimmered like water, conversations that moved fast and sharp, filled with names I barely recognized. I stood quietly near him, letting him carry the small talk while I observed from the edges, trying to disappear into the noise. But then chaos struck. It happened so fast I barely had time to think. A protester burst through the entrance, shouting about corruption, their voice echoing through the marble hall. Others followed, pushing past security, and in an instant, the air of elegance shattered. Guests screamed, glasses toppled, the crowd surged toward the exits in a panicked wave, heels clattering, fear spilling everywhere. For a second, the old Cheryl wanted to shrink back, to let someone else handle it. But something inside me, the same instinct from the night of the robbery, took over. I moved forward. "Stop pushing!" I called out, my voice steady and clear. I grabbed hold of a woman who had stumbled, guiding her toward the side. I found myself ushering people away from the crush, pointing them toward open exits, keeping them moving without stampeding. My calm spread like ripples in water. People slowed, breathing steadier as they followed my voice instead of the panic around them. Security rushed to regain control, but by then, most of the guests were already outside, safe. I walked out last, my hands still trembling though no one could see. The night air was sharp against my skin, and for the first time in minutes, I let myself exhale. When I turned, I saw him watching me, the billionaire who had plucked me from obscurity. His expression wasn't surprise this time, it was pride. He stepped closer and whispered, "This is who you are, Cheryl. You don't just stay calm in chaos, you create calm for others." The words hit me harder than the noise of the protest had, because I realized he was right. This wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was me. The same steadiness I once thought meaningless was the very thing shaping my future. That night, the world saw it too. Reporters captured my voice guiding people out. Guests whispered about the woman who kept everyone steady. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just a waitress. I was Cheryl, and I was ready to claim the strength I'd carried all along. Looking back now, it feels unreal how far I've come. There are still mornings when I wake up expecting to see the cracked ceiling of my tiny apartment, half waiting for the radiator to groan awake. But instead, I find myself in a different world, a world I never imagined stepping into. Yet even with all the changes, I've learned something important. At my core, I'm still the same Cheryl. After the gala, everything shifted. Strangers knew my name. Articles were written about the woman who stayed calm. Invitations poured in from people who once wouldn't have given me a second glance. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. But the truth is, recognition was never what I wanted. What mattered was what I could do with it. He, the billionaire who first noticed me, made a decision that shocked everyone. He didn't just hire me or keep me as some hidden advisor. He introduced me as his partner in a new foundation aimed at helping communities like the one I came from. People gasped when he said my name alongside his. Some questioned him, many doubted me. But he stood firm, and for the first time, so did I. I poured myself into the work, Not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because I knew what it felt like to struggle. I knew what it was like to choose between rent and groceries, to feel invisible while the world moved on without you. And every project we started, every life we touched, reminded me that my past wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was my strength. Of course, it wasn't all smooth. There were days when the pressure weighed heavy, when whispers of, "She doesn't deserve to be here," found their way back to me. But I no longer carried those words like chains. Instead, I let them fuel me. Calmness doesn't mean silence, I realized. It means knowing when to speak and when to act, even when the world is loud around you. One evening, months later, I stood in a crowded hall again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was celebration. People were gathered to honor the work we had done together. As I looked around, I realized the shocking move wasn't that a billionaire chose me. The shocking move was that he gave me the chance to choose myself, to stand up, to believe that being simple never meant being small. I started as a woman behind a counter, unseen and underestimated, but now I live knowing that calm can move mountains, that steadiness can change lives. My life may have transformed, but the lesson remains. True strength isn't found in wealth or power. It's found in the moments you refuse to let fear own you. And that, I've learned, is a strength the world can never take away. If my story meant something to you, then I hope you carry this with you. Being calm in chaos is not weakness. It's power. I was once just a simple woman behind a counter, invisible to the world. But calmness turned into courage, and courage turned into change. Maybe you've felt overlooked. Maybe you've believed your quiet strength didn't matter. I'm living proof it does. So if you believe in resilience, in second chances, and in the idea that even ordinary lives can hold extraordinary strength, stay with me. Subscribe, share this story with someone who needs hope, and remember, you might just be the calm in someone else's storm.